So our friend Steve Shipley of Deloitte, really honored to have you here, sir, and that you'll be having a brilliant conversation with somebody I happen to know, Chris Benson. He's the chief strategist for AI at Lockheed. Someone I've been trying to get to join us for some time, so this is a coup for me, sir. I'm glad you're here. Steve, it's wonderful to have you. If you would, just tell us a little bit about yourself, your role at Deloitte, et cetera, and then if you would introduce your guests, we look forward to your stimulating conversation.
Awesome. Well, thank you, gentlemen. Certainly excited to be here today. Again, my name is Steve Shepley, principal at Deloitte. Been with the company for about 24 years. I spent almost all my time serving the aerospace and defense industry, and really my focus is helping companies, harvest the value of a lot of the digital transformations that are going on. Some of those exist out on the shop floor through improved connectivity to machinery. Some of those in and around the data space, and that'll be a little bit about what we're talking today in our conversation. And I'm very excited to have Chris joining us today. Chris works in the Chief Technology Office at Lockheed Martin as a principal strategist. His expertise is really at that intersection of artificial intelligence, autonomy, and software-defined warfare. Chris actually conceived, designed, and is actively developing JADFAB, which is a revolutionary approach to battle space data fabric logistics for JADO and JADC2, as well as expanded maneuver. Before joining Lockheed 4 years ago, Chris was the inaugural chief scientist and artificial intelligence leader for Honeywell. Chris is also a co-host of Practical AI Podcast, which has about 200 episodes currently released to the global audience. So we're certainly happy to have Chris with us today. Chris, welcome to the show. How are you?
Hey, I'm very well. Thank you for having me today.
Awesome. Well, maybe to warm us up a bit, this topic of AI can be confusing to a number of folks. What was your first interaction with AI? How did you actually get involved in this space?
So that goes back a long way. I've been with Lockheed Martin for only 4 years and never anticipated being here at this point, but my parents were both full-time employees for their whole careers at Lockheed. And way back in the early 90s, when the YF-22, the two prototypes that were brand new for what would become the F-22, were being tested at Edwards, one of those prototypes had a crash on the runway. Unfortunately, the pilot survived, but there was a number of problems to solve, and my dad was the person that had to do that. And so he brought what was AI of the day, which was the neural networks of the early 90s, to bear on trying to solve that problem. And so I was a college student, and he would come home and he would leave all the classified stuff, of course, out of it, everything that was proprietary, but we would talk about the mathematics and the data science of it. And I learned about neural networks. And by the time we got to the end of that year, I had been doing them. We were, he was busy writing neural networks in C, and he kind of brought that home, and it was a father-son thing for a while. So it was a pretty special point in my life, but we're talking 30 years back now.
Yeah, it's an incredible story, and I have to imagine for most of the listeners, many of them didn't experience AI probably until more recently, when individuals have been interacting with it. So it's great you have such a long purview into the topic, and maybe that'll start us with our first, discussion topic. Given the advancements in AI over the last 30 years, Chris, how do you think it's going to impact jobs, and maybe specifically engineering jobs? We were on this topic of innovation from the last panel, and maybe even more broadly, human life in the future. What do you think AI is really going to do for the masses?
So what we're seeing is not necessarily what many folks were expecting to see as this field was progressing. People got caught up in things like AGI, which is artificial general intelligence, which is essentially the idea of the super intelligent, self-conscious AI that's dominating. That's not what we've seen. What we've seen is the ability to do deep learning, which is what AI is realized at this point in time. And there's a set of different types of models that are really impacting a variety of industries, including our own industry in a big way. And they give us the capability to do things like pattern matching and analysis and generative or creative things that nobody 10 years ago, when this wave started going, was really anticipating. And so that's certainly, as you drive forward in these technologies and they become less expensive and more powerful, and as the hardware on them is driving down, it becomes very, very appealing to put those into a variety of situations to improve what your output is at whatever kind of company at, as well as drive down cost. And so that obviously impacts human workers. And so we're going through a transition, and we're still fairly early in that process where we're going to, in our industry, we like to talk about crude and uncrewed as being the way forward. But in general, people are going to have a relationship with many AI tools in their lives. Some of them are visible and some are invisible. And those AI tools are going to be really good at some things that a human had been doing. And so going forward, we have to find a new future. We have to find a new way of valuing our productivity so that we can fit into that equation very well. And so for engineers and for technical people that are looking at that forward, instead of being worried about the AI, I would embrace it, look at it as a new set of tools, just like we have with so many before us, and find places where your human brain, which is still an incredibly unique tool itself, is able to bind different aspects together, so that if you have a particular model that's really good, better than the best human in the world at doing one particular task, you don't want to compete with that. What you want to do is combine all of those capabilities across those tasks in different ways and be very creative. So I have a 10-year-old daughter, and what I am trying to do as she's coming up is to teach her about creativity and about thinking outside the box. I'm teaching her that when she's in the classroom and eventually when she gets into a job, be the person that thinks differently from the rest of the folks in the room. You don't need another person saying, yes, and I agree, and going, be the person who is throwing out something unusual and different and bringing a different solution. And I think that if we have lots of people doing that, then there's a huge value for humans in the workplace for a long time to come.
Wow, great perspective. And I think really good guidance when you think about future workers sitting alongside AI and how it augments their day job, and then really where the human adds the most to the equation on that creative side is really unique.
Indeed.
So let's get deeper into AI. When we think about AI, what do you think its impacts will be on the future of warfighting? How is it going to change, the mission of our warfighters and what war is like?
So at Lockheed Martin, I spend pretty much all of my time thinking about this, and we have this context that you might align with these things that you see from DoD and the IC. We call it 21st century warfare, which is a collection of all the sciences and technology areas that need to go forward and put together the solutions for that future battle space. And so what we're seeing here is if you take these things we're already discussing, AI and its realization in the form of autonomy in terms of both robotics and flying and ground machinery and undersea machinery, things that are tools for the battle space. The ability to put those out into the battle space is going to increase dramatically. It will drive the cost down on doing those. And what we'll see is the word I often use is we're going to flood the battle space with autonomy. So you're going to have the warfighter in a very, very busy battle space with many, many more tools than they've ever had before. And some of those tools will be very big, advanced, sophisticated tools like F-35s. And some of those tools are going to be very small drones that are essentially one-time use, disposable, cost a couple of $1,000s, and yet have models embedded within them that do one job or a couple of different jobs really, really well. And so the future battle space is so busy that it's a level of scale that we've never seen before. And that is going to create an orchestration challenge for us that we're busy working on right now. So lots of data at massive scale, everything is communicating, everything is being organized so that you can satisfy the mission at hand. And the mission may evolve very rapidly in the battle space, and you have to be able to react to that in real time. So you're really looking at what is software-defined warfare, which I know we have some speakers that are going to address specifically in a little bit, so I'll stay away from that. It's a hugely important topic, mixed with massive amounts of data, artificial intelligence, and all of these warfighting platforms that will be working together to accomplish the mission in real time, very, very rapidly, and at a level far beyond a human brain's ability to grasp it all at the same time.
So go a little bit deeper into that piece. So as you have numerous nodes now all connected, and largely today, some are connected, some aren't. What role will the human play in the decision making, or will the human's role change where they're simply picking from a suite of options proposed by the AI, or does it work perfectly autonomous until some type of pivot point? How do you really see the role of the individual in this crowded battle space?
So it's going to be an evolution, and it's starting from where we are today to where we're able to control, most of what's happening there in real time with humans in the loop. As you have many things, you will have to automate that just to be able to manage it over time. And so I think you've kind of hit on those points even in the question. And there is governance, and there is the ability to roll up a tactical situation, to understand to both sense it, to understand what the tactical situation is, and to be able to initiate action again, for that particular situation that you're looking at. And so that will require quite a bit of automation that rolls up to humans that are in the loop, but you're going to have to begin in the years ahead, you'll have to begin aggregating that command and control and having automation that does that. And that will be an evolving thing. We're also at a point in history where we're not yet very trustful of AI tools. We haven't been using them long enough, but as they become more pervasive in the battle space and in our lives in general across the board, it will become just very second nature to use models in every capacity of our lives. And that will leak back into how we approach the battle space, and that we'll have tried and true autonomy. It will be, kind of going back to our DoD ethical standards. It's responsible, it's equitable, it's traceable, it's reliable, and it's governable. And that will give us confidence to use that and to be able to manage that at the scale that the future will take us into.
Do you believe our adversaries are more sophisticated, less sophisticated? Where do you think they are today on this front?
So there is a lot of opinions out there, back and forth, a lot of conversation. And I look at that not only from my job at Lockheed Martin and the work I do there, but also in the practical AI sense, as in terms of the podcast. I'm talking to people from all industries. So, clearly, there are many players in the AI space all over the world. The US and China, if you were to measure based on the number of research papers published, we are both leading the way. The US, by that metric, I believe, is still out front, but not by very far, and we'll get past probably in that fairly soon. I don't think that alone, I don't think it's a simple question to answer. I think that there are some things that we do better, and there are some things that the Chinese do better, that play into the values of each culture that are a little bit different in different capacities. And so that's a complex mesh. I actually think it's the wrong thing for us to be thinking about. We should assume that they're incredibly capable, a full peer adversary in that capacity, and play to our strengths, and try to produce novel, creative solutions. I know the last speaker was talking about this, that can get us into competitive advantage in the battle space, even for short moments. And then we can exploit those and take advantage of those with all of the capability that we were just talking about a moment ago.
Fascinating. In your overview, you touched on another, pretty interesting topic. You talked about the reliability of AI, but also the governance that has to sit around it. Can you talk a little bit about some of the importance and then maybe some of the challenges around ethics in AI?
Yeah, we're very early in general in ethics. Over the last few years, ethical principles, which are kind of the highest level, have been addressed, and DoD published theirs, which I mentioned a few minutes ago, out there, and Lockheed followed suit, staying closely aligned to that. And in general, the defense industry and intelligence industry has done likewise. So after that, you start getting into the details of how do you do it at a tactical level with models. And the challenge there isn't just doing it, it's doing it with the most rapidly evolving field on the planet. So if you look, and I get a very clear view of this in the podcast role that I play, because I'm always talking to whoever is doing the latest, greatest thing. And it is, we do it every week, and we often have to choose between different topics. And I'm not talking about the podcast so much as just there's that much amazing new things coming out in this field. And so if you're going to apply ethics to that, you have to allow for your ethics to be, grounded in the principles, but fluid enough in the way that you execute so that you can track the evolution of these models. And so you're never done. That's the bottom line. You are going to take your principles and reapply them with different tool sets that are going to evolve rapidly to track the new capabilities. And we're right on what I believe is the cusp of a whole new set that are coming out in the months to come. What research papers I'm expecting based on what I'm tracking so far. So that job, the AI ethicist and the job of applying values to that, that is a very secure career.
I could imagine. And what's your perspective? I don't see a lot of those jobs existing today. Are you running into folks who are starting to shape and position for those?
Absolutely. There's a whole sub-industry within the larger AI community for ethics. There are now conferences on AI ethics. And there's a lot of different perspectives on what that is and different ways. And that's good. The diversity of ideas contributing to that is important because of all of the complexities that we were just talking about. So we're going to be figuring our way through this for a long time. We're going to develop very sophisticated, just like every other industry, very sophisticated tools. There will be large tool sets that you can go buy from vendors that will help you manage your AI ethics approach, that will evolve as the models and the technologies underlying those approach. So this is a big thing. This is the start of an effort that will pervade all industries to keep us in good alignment with our AI tools and not diverge to where we have conflict.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. Clearly, ethics will be a big challenge area as we move forward. You talked a little bit about your podcast and just some of the broad exposure you get from the questions, the conversations, and whatnot that happens in that venue. And I certainly know you do every day at your job with Lockheed. What are some of the other big AI challenges you see out in front of us? Beyond the ethics topic. You see hardware, software limitations, how we're training folks, any of those other broader challenges. I'd love to hear a little bit about that.
Well, to hit the ones that you're starting to allude to, from a training standpoint, the fields, and it's not one field. AI is a whole collection of different fields with a bunch of distinct jobs. So it's no longer just a data scientist. There are dozens and dozens of job roles now that are in this, and it is moving forward so fast because the technology and the science and mathematics are moving forward so fast that that training people becomes a challenge. So you kind of have to jump in, be very self-motivated, get some baseline, and then very rapidly start tracking what's happening going forward. To transition over to the next challenge, being able to manage it from a security standpoint, which is another big topic that we're talking about here in this conference, is also a challenge because recently we've seen a whole series of models evolving with new capabilities almost by the week. People were talking about DALL-E and more recently Stable Diffusion in terms of what they could do with images. That will very soon, we will be seeing releases in the video space, I'm quite sure. And it takes the idea of things, traditional topics, I say traditional meaning the last year or two, of things like deep fakes, and evolves those dramatically in terms of what's possible, which makes it really hard if you are up against an adversary who is out to spread misinformation through these technologies. That will make it very hard to understand what's real and what's not, what's generated, what's there, and what the mixture of those things are as we blend, because there are both positive and negative uses to blend the technologies into our reality. So the security industry is going to be highly challenged to do that. The defense industry is going to be highly challenged, and we really need folks who can track these going forward and be incredibly dynamic and pivot. If you for a moment feel like you got it, then that means you've already fallen behind. You have to be going, got that, what's next? What am I already missing going forward? So it's going to take a lot of very highly motivated people in these industries to keep a hold of it going forward.
Now that certainly makes sense. You mentioned that notion of creativity and how AI actually starts to play a role in potentially coming up with creative options or options, the human didn't think about. Where do you think that intersection is ultimately going to lie? Do you think part of the creative process will be supported by AI? Do you think it won't be? Do you think it's the right spot for AI to help spur some of those moments? Is if AI recommends something, is that creativity? What's your thought on that, Chris?
So that's evolving, obviously. And what I would have said a year ago was not the same as what I would say today, because like everyone else, I'm evolving as we go forward with this. I have redefined that for myself. I was limiting the idea of creativity, and I used to give talks talking about we have our creativity and the AI doesn't, but I've come to realize that the nature of creativity is fairly complex. And there is a diversity of ways to be creative. And we are seeing creativity that come from not only generative technologies in the AI space, like what we just talked about, things like DALL-E and Stable Diffusion recently, but from reinforcement learning. You have the ability through reinforcement learning, we've been seeing this for years, for a model to become more expert than the best human at a given task on the planet, because reinforcement learning is all about gaining experience. So you and I may have to do things at least 10,000 times, according to the classic rule, to become an expert in something over many years. But I can go and spend a very short amount of time and run a model through 10 million iterations of that instead of 10,000. And that model, if it has a robust enough data set that's applicable to that problem, will be better than any human on the planet at a given task. So that's a form of creativity too, being able to learn from experience and apply. And then the thing that we're seeing right now in the space that definitely affects us in defense and intelligence and national security at large is a merging of the different technologies. So if you look at the fact that previously you tended to see things that were convolutional in nature, or natural language processing with large language models, or they were generative, you saw DALL-E and Stable Diffusion, or you saw robotics and gaming and reinforcement learning, what's happened in the last year is they're merging those all together. And that's creating a whole new set of capabilities that don't fall neatly within any one of the subfields of AI. And so you're getting a lot of amazing capability that is both creative from the human people in terms of who's putting those models together, but also driving what is potentially AI creativity going forward to be able to achieve some incredibly complex capabilities. So it's a bold new world that we live in right now. When I hear people talking about the decline of kind of humanity and people, I'm like, this is the most interesting moment in human history right now. And we're not yet, the next one will be more, and the next one will be more. It's a pretty cool time to live.
Yeah, I definitely echo that. We've talked a lot about AI. Maybe one last opinion here. AI is the algorithm in the machine, and you talked a lot about all sorts of different learning mechanisms. But what feeds that is data. And
Absolutely.
there's always a lot of challenges out there with the quality of the data to feed it, how you feed the data. And I find a lot of people get paralyzed with AI because they're too worried about the inbound data. How can people better balance the amount of time they spend focusing on the cleanliness and quality of data versus the power of the algorithm? How do those two work together? What are you seeing in that space?
So I think people get a little bit freaked out about the challenge, and the approach that I found has worked best in my own experience and a number of other experts that I've had the privilege to talk to is to recognize this isn't a thing. You have, presumably your organization has a software process, and before AI became big, you were doing some data science at some level and having to bring data in from different use cases. And there's a cleaning process. You want to automate these things, but the key, and this to some degree it goes back to your challenge question a moment ago as another challenge that people have, is to start recognizing that data is one of your biggest assets, maybe your biggest asset of all. Integrate that in with your software story. In our industry, that's why software-defined warfare is becoming so important and will become ever more so going forward, because you can't separate the AI and the data that you're training upon and data that you're inferencing from your software. So, you know, within our industry, when we talk about things like JADO or MDO in Europe, JADC2, and the idea of executing on expanded maneuver, it takes all of those working great together, and not stick AI off as its own thing, not stick software in a separate thing and fund those differently. You need to integrate them all together and have a good system that pulls the data in, lets you train the models, has fantastic automation for deployment, getting things out to the edge where the battle is, and getting the data from that back so that you can continue to train and learn. And that's what our future is going to be. It's going to be the challenge of orchestrating all of those together.
Certainly not a trivial one, that's for sure, Chris. Well, I think that exhausts all our topics today, Chris. Any other parting thoughts you have for this group?
No, just stay optimistic. We are so privileged to be doing what we're doing here. And we're turning toward a time when I know the nature of our industry is changing dramatically in a bunch of different ways. But it's a joy to be able to work in these areas right now. And rather than be fearful of the future in the various capacities and worried about the downsides and the security risks, I would encourage everyone to embrace it, to recognize those challenges as something that you want to work on, and move forward with a positive mindset, because we're going to do some pretty amazing stuff in the near future and in the intermediate term. So keep going.
I couldn't agree more. Chris, thank you so much for your time today. Your insights are invaluable. And I will hand it back to the studio team.
Thank you very much.